When my son asked me if he could be involved in professional sport, I said yes, of course you can. And he said how? He said there's no one in sport who has any of the challenges that I do. My aim was to find these athletes, coaches, professionals, and interview them and share their stories so that they can show the world what is beyond perception. Hello and welcome to the Beyond Perception podcast, The Hyperfocus, a new and innovative show designed to provide support for everyone and anyone who's interested in supporting those with neurodiversity or those themselves that wish they could have greater support in their environments. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe and leave your comments and questions below. As always, we love to interact with our listeners and viewers. And I would like to welcome Emma Biggin, trainee sports psychologist, owner of the Big Sports Psych, where Emma will regularly update blogs to support her followers with the latest sports psychology. Emma, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you on board.
Hey, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure.
So, obviously, some people will remember my face from Series 1, but obviously you are a new face to our viewers and our listeners. So, do you want to just give us a little bit of an insight about yourself and why you wanted to be involved with us?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I am a trainee sports psychologist. I currently have a business which is a Big Sports Psych. So I work with a lot of athletes, coaches, even kind of S&Cs, physios, to try and support athletes and also to create environments for people where they can thrive in sport. So I guess my background has always been in sport. I was a footballer growing up, and I had a really tough time going into academy football when I was young, because you go from kind of playing just pure leisure to all of a sudden you're being watched every minute and you're having this trial and that trial and coaches are judging you, and it was terrifying. And I really struggled, and I think that's a big drive of kind of what I do now. And when I recently did a blog around neurodiversity in sport, and it actually stemmed from a lot of conversations that I've had with clients and also just kind of followers online as well, where there's a lot of challenges at the moment. And I feel like the sport environment, and in fact probably broader, even though it's a whole other topic, more broader in society as well, isn't necessarily supporting people with neurodiversity at the moment. And you reached out following that blog and we kind of chatted, and I think a question that you had was whether I personally was neurodiverse, and I don't believe that I am. However, sport for me, like I say, I've always loved sport. I've played sport since I can actually, well, as young as I can remember, in the garden with my brother all the time. So yes, I'm competitive and I love that side of sport, but over the years, sports provided me much more than an outlet for that competitive side, and that kind of competition side. And there's so many benefits to sport. It should be a safe environment that you can go, you can switch off, you can be with friends, you can get that sense of achievement, you can kind of just be yourself no matter what's going on in your life at that time. And speaking with people now and hearing that, irrespective of anything else, that's not a possibility for a lot of people. Like, it's not a safe environment for people. It's not supporting people. Really upsets me because it's provided me so much over a long time. And I just want to push to try and allow others to get the same benefits that sport has given me over that period of time.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that and giving the listeners a little bit of an insight to yourself. And like you say, you've got so much to offer, so we're really grateful that you've agreed to join us and become part of the team. So we know it's going to really benefit these podcasts. And speaking of these podcasts, what we want to give the listeners and our viewers an insight to is that we're aiming to make these 20-minute sessions. 20-minute sessions where we give you an insight into an area of your development, your practice, your session design, where you can not only support a neurodiverse athlete or as a neurodiverse coach, but also what we have learned is that by doing some of these adjustments and being aware of what you're doing, you can make your session more accessible to everybody. So, in episode one, what we'd like to do with you guys today is talk about the two most commonly known neurodiversities in ADHD and autism. We want to do a little bit of myth busting just so you are aware of obviously what to maybe consider, but also not to sometimes stereotype when you hear those. And what we hope to achieve is that you can then create sessions which are accessible for everybody. And when we talk about everybody, what you'll learn as we go through this process is that the subtle adjustments and changes you could make not only make the session greater and more accessible for the neurodiverse, but will also support those who are non-neurodiverse. So the first thing we're going to talk about is autism. Emma, what sort of myths are out there around autism?
I think there's a lot around autism. I think one of the big ones, because it's recognized as a spectrum disorder, people assume that the spectrum is essentially from like low to high. And one thing that gets thrown around a lot is, oh, everyone's on the spectrum. And it's like once you're past a point, you're then pushing over to another. And that's just not true. It's not how the spectrum works. It is a spectrum, and it's a spectrum based upon the combination of strengths and weaknesses that can be present within autism, not based on kind of severity or intensity level. So what it's trying to show is the fact that people with autism are not, it's not one size fits all. Like with anyone in this world, like with any other neurodiversity, it's not, oh, okay, you have this, therefore this is what you do. And that's it. You're in a category, you're in a box, and this is what it looks like. So the spectrum is meant to show that even under a broader term to say, okay, I am an autistic individual, that I can be different from another autistic individual. I'll have my own strengths, my own challenges, whereas they will also have strengths and challenges. They might match, they might cross over, they might be completely different. So massive myth around autism is that everyone's on this spectrum somewhere, and that it's essentially like a rating scale of low to high, because that's not how the system works within. There's common characteristics associated. Some of the key ones that people think about are things like communication, sensory processing, so either like a very high or very low processing of sensory information, as well as certain behaviors. But it doesn't mean that everyone's going to look or behave in exactly the same way across that spectrum as well.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing that, Emma. I think it's really good how you've kind of brought in the idea of the spectrum, which we hear a lot of people talking about, and how, you know, a lot of people will say everybody's on, and we know that's just not the case. That's not true. People are autistic or they're not autistic. You can't be part of it. Like, it's not like a little bit of you is. So it's definitely being aware that there's some changes and there's some differences in the characteristics of people, but we can't assume they're all the same. And that's the same with the ADHD as well, in terms of when a person is diagnosed with an ADHD condition, then they are broken into a couple of different areas. They could either be inattentive, meaning their concentration, their ability to focus is not the same level, and they can also be diagnosed as hyperactive. So, you know, where we get our lettering from for the ADHD, and within that, we automatically assume that means, and we've all heard it, is like it's the naughty kid who doesn't stop talking, doesn't stop moving, he's constantly arguing with people, and we know that that's not the case for ADHD. We know that that's the myth that creates a preconception of a player, of an athlete, of a person, and that can be really negative to the impact that the people have in the environments they go into. Now, what does happen is that people with ADHD will have moments of hyperactivity. So they may stim, and that might be seen as like leg bouncing or twitching or biting fingernails. They may look like they're daydreaming. Those things will happen, but that's not because they're just not interested and not listening. It's just that's part of how they regain their focus. It's how they keep themselves engaged. And I think as we explore on these podcasts, the subtleties around how we can support and help and guide these people, then again, like we said at the beginning, it will allow you to have a much broader training session, which is accessible for everybody.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think a few parents I've worked with, the pain it causes when they're consistently having to tell their child to act a certain way, to hide a certain behavior, to make sure that it fits what the general public are doing, because people don't understand why they might be acting in a different way or perceiving something in a different way, or like you say, maybe they are non-stop fidgeting, but actually if you ask them afterwards, they've taken everything on board. But because it doesn't fit with society's norm of what it should look like when someone's talking to people or when instructions are being given, they're almost told that they have to mold and fit, and that is really tiring, and it's really upsetting for parents to feel that their child just isn't accepted. They have to try and be something else to fit in, when actually the environment could change. If we've got education and we make adaptations, we can adapt the environment they're in, so actually everyone can just be themselves in it, and everyone's still benefiting, and if nothing else, they're benefiting more than they would have done before.
And you use the word the masking. Um, what would you say masking is, so that the listeners might have an idea of that terminology, and then we could maybe have a little chat around what that might look like in a session or from a person.
Yeah, so masking is a behavior that's seen quite a lot in neurodiverse populations, and it's essentially showing behaviors that they believe are deemed appropriate in the situation that they're in. So hiding any of the perhaps emotions, any of maybe dysregulation that's going on because there's a certain way to act or behave within that environment. And that can go on pretty much, if you think, if a kid goes off to school at 8 o'clock in the morning and then they go straight to their sports practice after school, that could go on from 8 in the morning all the way up till 5 o'clock in the evening, maybe later. And that it's really, really tiring to try and do that. That's why often parents will say that there's almost a bit of an outburst back at home, because now they're comfortable and it can just be released, whereas they've had to hide it all day to try and fit into that kind of environment that they're within in that time.
Yeah, and I think you've summarised that really nicely. And then when you see that in a, like when the coaches and see that in the environment in the evening, sometimes they perceive that as they're not able to suit the training sessions or the club or the sport, because they don't have the same set of behaviours that they're seeing from maybe 90% of the group. And it becomes very quickly an easy way to label the player and to dismiss them as a disruptive person within the environment. And I think over time, as we go through the show and in general, like from my own personal experiences as well, there's this idea of like, once you understand what's going on in the minds of those people and how you can provide them outlets to be themselves, then you find that the sessions become a lot more free flowing, and you actually find that the unmasking of the athlete becomes a really powerful tool, which really develops the individual and also is then embraced by those around. Um, so I think it's a really important part of this myth busting in today's episode around how we can't just label the people in front of us purely because of our preconceptions of what they may or may not have.
Yeah, I think it's
So
pivotal, that assumption, not feeding off of an assumption you have about a person, whether that's, oh, they're moving, so they're not listening to me. They've got their back to me, so they're not listening. Or, they've separated themselves. They must be upset. No one would want to be separate from everyone else. But these are massive assumptions that we've made that aren't always true. So it's really about getting to know your individuals, the people you're working with. You should know them, their preferences, their strengths, their challenges. It all stems from the same place.
yeah, and it's interesting. A little anecdotal story is that I shared with a sports psych who I work with about just how I engage with things, and we're currently doing a set of workshops with a number of other coaches, And he came up to me at the end of the first workshop and basically said that I was the barometer for the level of detail and the interaction and the time that was spent on the actual uh, workshop itself. He said because he understood what my triggers were to say that I'm starting to get uncomfortable or I'm struggling to remain engaged, he would then start to change up the type of session or the flow of it. And it's really interesting, like he's using his knowledge of me to empower the whole of the workshop so it's of better quality. And I just think this is where the more we can get our listeners to be aware of what it is we're talking about and how to support them, the more they can make that session become so much more accessible and enjoyable for everybody involved. Now, what I do want to know is what would be your advice to a coach? What would be your tip if we're considering a tip to start this session off? What would we be wanting to share with people so that they can start breaking down the myths, remove that ability to mask, and start to create a more holistic and accessible session?
Yeah, I think my piece of advice would just be don't be scared to start conversations. Don't be scared to ask questions because the answers are typically there. Like they're not hidden, they're not taken away. The answers are there. It's just sometimes being scared of what starting that conversation can lead to stops us from even having it in the first place. I actually reached out to a few of my followers that I spoke to, and I said, look, as an autistic athlete, what would you want your coach to do or to say? Like, what one piece of advice would you give your coach to better support you? And someone got back to me, and I loved what they came up with. So with permission, I've stolen it, which is why I'm looking down and looking at exactly what it was to get it perfect. But the important things with it are, number one, timing. So when you're having these conversations, asking these questions, it's about don't pick a time when an athlete is already in a high stress situation. Okay, let's say something's just happened and they're really overwhelmed. It's not the time to start trying to delve into these conversations. There needs to be time for that to kind of be decreased so that you can have these conversations. Also, in front of big groups probably isn't a time to be having these. Is there an opportunity to take an athlete aside on their own where you can actually have an open and honest and trusting conversation? And the advice that I got was a simple question, which was, it seems that you might, is that the case, and how can I help? So it's avoiding the assumption of, I've seen this, we need to change it. It's saying, okay, from my observations, it seems that this might be happening, or it seems that you might be feeling this way. Number one, is that even true? Because the individual might go, no, that's not true. And actually, I like being in this situation. I like it when it's like this. And you've already learned something about that individual. And then number two, how can I help? A lot of the time, like I say, the answers aren't non-existent. They're not hidden. But a lot of the time we don't ask the question to know what we can do. And you might not get it right first time. A lot of us don't. I would put my hands up. I definitely haven't got it right first time with most people I've worked with. But you have those conversations, you welcome feedback, and then you work together to keep building and to get somewhere. It's not an expectation that everything's going to be perfect after one conversation, but it shows that you care enough that you're willing to try and make some adaptations.
Yeah, and what I like about that is that the question is open enough that we could use that with anybody within the session. So rather than jumping to assumptions regarding the behaviour or the 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 actions and behaviours, that what we're doing is we're checking in with our athlete first. We're recognising there's a change in their state and making sure that we've not misjudged it or we got it wrong. They can tell us, actually, no, I'm feeling great, I'm feeling fine, actually I do feel like this. And then that follow-up question of what can we do to help you, I think is really powerful. And like you said, most of the time they will always know what they need, or they will give you some sort of an idea. And then there will be times when they just might say, I don't know, and that's perfectly fine. And from a coaching point of view, that's perfectly fine to then go, okay, I'm not sure right now what I can do to help you. Let's work together and solve this. And there's a number of variations of that could be. That could be just reducing the amount of pressure, the amount of language, making it less stressful. It could just be giving them a timeout moment. It could be getting them to work in a smaller group. There's multiple ways which we will explore as we go through the shows. But I think that question's super powerful, and I would love our listeners and our viewers to try that in the next sessions, and feedback to us on what sort of actions and interactions they've had off the back of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be great. Like I say, it's one question, start the conversation, because a lot of the time that's the almost the hardest part. People fear it, but we got to have the conversations, and don't fear saying something wrong, getting something wrong. We'll do it. It's fine. But it shows, like I say, the hardest ones that I've heard are ones where they feel they're not even being listened to. So just have the conversations to say that I'm here to support you. I might not know how, I might not get it right, but I'm here to do it. I think that's really the most important thing with it.
I think that's a great message, and I think that's a great way to end this podcast. So thank you very much for joining me today, Emma. I'm looking forward to the next one, and thank you very much to our listeners and viewers, and looking forward to hearing how you've used the questions, how you found the first episode, and we'll see you all in episode 2. Thank you very much.